Hey everyone, it's Wes Spence. Welcome back to ScarTissue, podcast by CAVU International, where we dig into the stories behind the scars. We're here to explore the human condition, resilience, mindset, growth, and the stories that, well, quite frankly, will leave a mark. Today, we are honored to have as our guest Dr. Ulrik Christensen, CEO of Area9 Lyceum. Hey Ulrik, welcome to the show. Great to have you on.
Great to be here.
Well, I was looking at your website. One thing that popped out at me was you guys talked about you're the most advanced learning platform in the world. And that's a bold statement. So if you can go into adaptive learning, some of the background behind Area9, your mission, what you focus on, I'd love to hear what you got on that.
Sure, thank you.
You bet.
Well, yeah, it's a bold statement, but I think we can back it up. So we spent about 20 years doing hardcore R&D into technology that really moves things. And it's in two different ways I think we've traditionally been able to back that statement. The first one is we've been building these personalized systems, adaptive learning systems, for well over 15 years now. And one of the things where we really have moved the needle, we've invented this modern generation of adaptive learning, and we've substantially changed the threshold or the benchmark for what does it actually mean. Mm-hmm. Like, you can be adaptive if you change every week by mailing in your written assignment and you get another one back. That's sort of adaptive. Sure. Or you can have high resolution adaptivity, like the stuff we've been doing, where we adapt every 30 seconds. And of course, the more precision you can shape an individual learning path with, the greater the total impact you can observe. That's also one of the reasons why we have dozens, if not hundreds, of studies showing what is the impact of this. So on the adaptive itself, it's something where we've been proud of being able to pioneer things where we can basically cut initial training time down to half, despite the fact that we're waiting for the slowest learners. We can get everybody through, just regardless of how fast they learn. And things like this are the reason why I think it is pretty widely recognized in the industry that is substantially different. It used to have a big problem, though. The big problem was it was pretty costly to make. We had thousands of people working on it while we were building a very large platform together with McGraw-Hill that is used pervasively in U.S. colleges. And for that, we built even maybe 10, 20 times more technology to allow us to be able to build content to be delivered that way. And then the latest generation of these things and the latest developments is that we have pioneered a completely new type of technology that leverages large language models like GPT or Claude to automate some of these things so that you can cut the cost of building these things by at least a factor of 20 and sometimes a factor of 100. Wow. So what used to cost $1 million costs maybe $5,000 or $10,000 now.
Wow. So yeah, kind of take a step back just for the viewers out there. When you talked about when you're adaptive learning, you got it down about every 30 seconds. What does that actually mean? So, from a layman's perspective and an Arizona public school kid, right? It means that if I'm taking a test, it measures my answers and my responses every 30 seconds so that if it's going to say either I'm overextending myself or I'm not challenging myself enough, and it'll correct me as I go along the stages, or is that how it works? Or
so that's actually a really good question, because most people have heard about adaptive testing.
Sure.
And it's a completely different animal.
Okay.
Adaptive testing is made so that you, with as few questions as possible, can get some kind of score.
Yeah.
And what it basically does is it tries to see, are you in the 80 to 90% range? And now let's figure out if you're 84 or an 87. What we do is completely different. Everybody gets to 100%. Yeah. Which sounds a little bit odd. Yeah. But the given in adaptive systems is not the time that is available. The given is that everybody gets to full proficiency. The variable is the time it takes. And we use the questions, or we call them probes, because it can also be exercises. It can be all sorts of stuff. But those measurement instruments we're using underway, we use them to guide learning. It's a byproduct that we actually know how good you are at the end. Like, you don't have to do a test at the end because we measured everything underway, but it's being measured with the purpose of learning, with the purpose of shaping the learning around you. So we use those individual test questions, you could say, or these probes, to decide what do we do next. And in some ways, you can compare it to what people now know about large language models. Like, a few years ago, I didn't dare to try to explain this, but most people have heard that GPT is making the sentence as it goes, right? It doesn't have a plan for what the rest of the sentence will be when it starts putting words together. We do the same thing. We don't know what we are going to do in half an hour. What we do is we measure very meticulously where you are now, and then we decide what the next best step is.
So this is what they call the fourth generation?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, so how does that, you can kind of walk us through first, second, third, and then what makes them different between each one, and kind of where you see maybe going into fifth generation, if you have answers on that too. Yeah.
So first generation was actually not hardcore adaptive learning. It was stuff we built into simulators. So my background was we built simulators for clinical purposes, and part of what we could see was that people learned so differently in those simulators that we had to find ways to shape, particularly the debriefing, the automated debriefing that came out of your simulated performances, shape that so you could learn from them. Those early generations of adaptivity had lots of advantages, but also enormous weaknesses, because you could like only cover like relatively scattered areas. The second generation adaptive systems actually could do what I just described. They were able to, if you've learned something somewhere else, you could bolt it on top of it. You could compare them to the suction cup GPSs.
Okay.
Like you could basically just plug them into an education system where you had classroom training, you had existing textbooks, but what they did was that they helped you go through the material you were trying to learn, and then they were able to keep you on track and help you practice it and make it stick. The third generation platforms were able to begin to close larger gaps, so they could teach as well. The second generation systems could help check that you've learned things, help keep you on track, come back to things that you should repeat, so you could see them as like practice systems or rehearsal systems, whereas the third generation systems were able to begin to close gaps. And the more advanced they get, the bigger gaps in knowledge they can close. So you can think about it like the probing part can reveal where are the gaps, and then you fill it with learning resources, as we call them, like basically ways to learn something. So there are three major components in adaptive systems. We need to have a map of where you need to be at the end of training or end of learning, right?
Sure.
So you need to have very granular learning objectives. That is basically the map we're navigating on. The second part is, for each learning objective, we need to have a way to check that you have accomplished that learning objective. And if you have not accomplished it, then if you have learning resources, which came in with the third generation systems, you can close those gaps. And the fourth generation systems are working with skills as well. They're working with multiple dimensions, where the first, and actually all of adaptive learning in itself is only targeting the knowledge domain. The fourth generation platforms are able to do both knowledge and skill.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
skills in a broader sense, including character development, metacognitive development, things like that.
So, one of the biggest challenges, we've been working as CAVU, we've been working across multiple industries, primarily oil and gas to start with, and now we're getting into manufacturing and law enforcement, what have you, and every workforce I've seen over my darn near 12 years of doing this type of work, especially the last couple of years, ever since COVID, the challenge of a rapidly changing workforce, as in a lot of people coming in and out of the job, not sticking around, people getting into the job that have a lot less inherent knowledge. Just one of the main big manufacturers we worked with, they used to rely on kind of native skills of farming and so when they get to the manufacturing floor, that person probably already knows a pretty good amount about how that tractor or piece of equipment works. So training them didn't take a lot. So what could, this fourth generation adaptive learning, do you foresee that being able to bridge that skill set gap a lot faster with no matter what type of industry you're in? Is that what you're envisioning?
Yes, both that, but it's also one of the reasons why we actually even started making the adaptive systems in the first place was that, and when we came from skills development, we came from human factors, from team training, from communication. But what we found was that it always got in the way that people didn't have enough knowledge. Like the knowledge foundation was too weak. So we always ended up using these very expensive and rare training environments for teaching stuff or having people learn stuff that was so trivial. And we were like, hey, let's find a cheaper way to do this. Let's find a more accessible way to get those things out of the way. and over the last, and this is like 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And one of the things that has become very, very clear throughout that period of time, and all the research we've done in the meantime, is it's an interaction between knowledge and skills that is interesting. Like neither of them can stand alone. Like
right.
you have, but the second that you support skills development with understanding what's going on, like that interaction between the two, it's a synergistic effect there is between them if you do both at the same time. And that's the entire idea about these fourth generation platforms, that you actually have integrated approaches and integrated learning architectures where you can do both. So let's say that you are struggling with the skills development. We now know whether it's because your knowledge is weak about it. We're able to say, but let's get the knowledge in place first. Or actually, when you teach people new things, you can design it so that you're sure that you don't waste time practicing a skill or practicing something that requires maybe machinery or working in a team, and wasting it because people show up unprepared. Of course, the interesting journey to this has been through completely classic, or almost a tragic education, where we put kids in a classroom teaching them stuff completely out of context. But that's where most of the knowledge acquisition has happened in the past. But the goal, of course, is how do we get it to where it's relevant, where we put everything together.
Right. So thinking about your traditional education model. So going through K through 12 or university system, how would, if you were king for the day, how would you mold or modify that education structure to combine those which are knowledge versus skills? How would you utilize that to kind of move those models forward into a new millennium, or a new venue, or a new view, if you will?
That's very interesting. That's actually what I just finished a book about.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I was going to talk to you about the book. Yeah, good.
And,
what's the name of the book, by the way? I'm sorry.
Mastery, and why deeper learning is essential in an age of disruption.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's like this thing where how could we reshape education? And the book is about examples where it has actually worked. Because one of the fascinating but also scary things we found, and all the research for the book, where we did hundreds of interviews as well to further understand this area better. One of the shocking things was that you typically only, particularly for adults, find strong educational systems where it's death and disability that is at risk. So you find it in healthcare, you find it with special forces.
Yeah.
and you find, as you know, and I've had the luxury of studying like more or less anything. But then I had this revelation some years ago. I found a small niche of education, even in an area I'm passionate about, which is diving. And then I found these extreme cave divers, and they have the best education systems I've ever seen. And of course, it completely supports our hypothesis or the correlation we found, which is the larger the risk, the better education gets. And these guys, while some of them think it's an imperative that they have to go into these caves, but between you and me, I actually think they have a choice. They can decide not to do it. Where you came from, you actually did it for a reason. Like there was probably something really bad happening if you didn't do it.
Right.
But it's something for these cave divers. They were totally driven by something where they honestly probably had a choice not to do it. But because they decided to take that risk, it has stimulated a culture of learning that is like completely second to none. And I keep getting surprised about how good they are. Also, when they're changing things, they're better at it. So their meta skills, their ability to change is also better.
Yeah. Can I read you one thing? As I was looking up, what are they? They're the global underwater explorers, right? Is the guys you're talking about?
That's correct.
So what I was reading about it, and it from a military perspective, especially naval special warfare perspective, and everything they're talking about here should be one of those where I would say, duh, when you're talking about it, but I'm going to read it for the audience. So this is the Global Underwater Explorers. They're known for a rigorous style of training that diverges from other diver training organizations, and seeks to establish high levels of diver proficiency by extending training time, establishing objective performance criteria, and requiring requalification among instructors and divers. They're talking, so to me, like I said, duh, but they're like you were talking about the debriefing they do. For anybody who's never talked or even thought about cave diving, I think it's one of the most dangerous things in the world you can do. because there's no margin for error. If you lose any amount of oxygen, if you get lost, God forbid you lose your light or your line or your guide out of there, you're done. And so like you said, if when you get to a very dangerous profession like that or hobby, really, you have to it really focuses your mind. And so there's no bullshit. There's nothing like that. You have to make sure you're doing things correctly each and every time. And so how did that, working with them and talking about how they do cave diving, what impact did that have on your philosophy for adaptive learning? Did it take it in a new direction? Did it just magnify what you already had? What was its impact?
So I would say it has not changed so much how we think about adaptive learning, but it has changed my perspective, and it has further emphasized or encouraged me for this interaction between the two worlds, because it took 1 hour for them to decide we definitely want to use this approach to adaptive learning to supplement what we're doing.
Yeah.
And they did it with a very logic, which was, if we do this, we can spend twice as much time in the water when we're together in a place where we can practice things.
That's right. That's awesome.
And the difference, of course, is that in the past, why didn't they do e-learning in the past like all the other dive agencies?
Right.
The difference is with all the other dive agencies, and I teach for one of them, we have no clue when people show up whether they've actually learned anything from it. When they can have completed it and be completely ignorant about really, really critical things. And that's also dangerous, because if we're now assuming that they know something and we go straight to more integrative teaching, that's also dangerous. The difference, of course, is we can validate, and that's why when we've typically worked in those areas where it is super critical if learning didn't work, which is also why you can trust the education that comes out of it. That means that when people show up, they're much more at a base level of knowledge, and then we can get to all the harder things. Because I don't think the knowledge in itself will make you a cave diver. I often use the analogy. It's like, are you going to let somebody operate on your kid because they watched the YouTube video about how to remove an appendicitis? Of course not.
Right.
We know that there are so many other things in it, and anybody who claims that they cannot get task loaded, like they are the most dangerous people in the world, because everybody can get task loaded. But the way to appreciate and the way to start working with it is you actually have to put yourself in those situations again and again and again.
Yeah.
And that's where this interaction between the knowledge and the skills is fascinating. And that's where it's really pushing us right now, which has been, how do we best build that knowledge foundation for somebody who is immediately willing to re-architect and already starts from a brilliant position in terms of skills building and teamwork building and all the other things. Communication in hardcore technical diving is super critical. The amount of communication that happens all the time. Yeah. And if you take cave diving, how do you communicate? What is the most important thing in cave diving with communication? It's actually how you move your light, and how you not move your light. So all these things, but you can only get to it if you actually spend enough time in those caves or in those kind of learning situations.
Yeah. So kind of going off that, I've been, I as a kid who grew up in the 80s and watching original Terminator, always talk about Skynet becoming aware, right? I always got to worry about that. But all kidding aside, things like ChatGPT, Grok 3 now, you have all these AI, and I stayed in Holiday Inn Express once, so I'm not all that educated on it. But in my opinion, I'm seeing kind of an inflection point with AI coming pretty quick. And as it's building, how do you how much AI do you have currently incorporated into your system? And what do you see the future going from here as AI gets much more developed, much more rapidly as it builds on itself to help you with adaptive?
But the really big impact right now is that AI can help us produce content for adaptive delivery at a fraction of the cost before. And what that allows us to do is two things. One of them is that we can get to areas that normally could not afford to move to adaptive learning. But the other thing is that you can build adaptive content on the fly. So you can almost on the fly, which means as soon as you realize that there is a new need, you don't have the lag in being able to develop content that is specific to the context that you need it in. So that's a really, really important impact of it. Where is it not going to help? Well, so the thing is, it's not likely that AI will very soon be able to take care of all of that underwater work that these divers are doing. Not likely that AI will have robots that can do the appendicitis operation. Mm-hmm. So what will then happen? Well, so particularly because of that interaction between knowledge and skills, if we can eliminate more of the knowledge challenges early, and I short digression here, but it's important, is people think that the need for us to learn something or acquire knowledge will go down because of these systems. My claim is it will go up. Yep. And the reason for that is that we as humans will have to integrate much more. Our role in the future will be putting it all together, applying it in contexts that are not possible for computers to apply it in. But unfortunately, it will not just be to apply something we've been told by AI. It will be us putting things together and then do it. What that requires is that we continue the trend since the first industrial revolution. How much stuff do we have to store in our heads now compared to in 1830?
Right.
A lot more. And it's only gone one way, and it will. I actually think it will even explode in that case. Now in this future case. So if I'm right about that, then having technologies where we can reliably make sure that we have the appropriate knowledge to be able to get to what humans need to do, and to shape the skills that only human can possess and deliver competently, that's where AI will help. So AI is not going to take over jobs. Well, they will take over a lot of jobs, but the jobs that will last through this are not really threatened by AI anytime soon, because those are the things that requires humans and where there is no new good answers to. There are only new good answers to the knowledge-based jobs, the purely knowledge-based jobs. The same way as, yes, there are no secretaries who are typing anything anymore.
Right.
Those kinds of revolutions we will see, or the people who are putting books back into libraries. Like, of course, all of these similar things will happen, and also at a different order of magnitude than before.
Sure.
But where you see the interaction between knowledge and skills, it's an indirect impact and it's a positive impact.
Yeah, I think I always look, again, I try to make it simple. So I look at, going back to the early 80s or late 70s, you got Star Wars, right? I foresee AI being like that. You have a protocol droid, you have an R2-D2, and they're helping you out with things that like you said, you have so much more stuff you have to put into your head. Those kinds of devices, keep it out of your head and let them do that job so that you can focus on new avenues. I mean, think about, as we progress through history, how many people are out there picking their crops today. You got John Deere pickers, doing all that stuff for you, right? I think also you hit a really good point about how it's going to reduce the cost. So for me, looking at the power of not just AI, but adaptive learning, as you reduce the cost, that means you get more people learning more skills better and more effectively. And so now we just trained up a much greater portion of the human population than ever had it before. And so we're going to have people that are smarter that we never had been able to leverage. Now you're going to have them. They're going to be there. So I think, looking forward, I think that's going to be a positive within the human society. But however, having said that, where do you see, keep kind of landing on AI for a minute, what are some of the dangers of AI? I look at it, it's going to be a moral thing. I mean, how do you, because you look at some of the other parts of ChatGPT or Grok 3, you can go down some really dark roads and some of the options that you have there. So what do we do, or how do you think we as a society, as a human society, how do we, kind of mitigate some of the darker sections of that? What do you think about that?
Well, so I think that there are several kinds of risks, but there are at least two related to this. One of them is the bad actor, or the people who are trying to use it in a hostile way.
Sure.
And there is no discussion that there are some scenarios where these kinds of models can make something really malignant. Mm-hmm. I at least in the past, up until now, I've been quite confident that we, at least in the civilized part of the world, will put the same kind of boundaries on this as we put on biological weapons, on nuclear weapons, on genetically modified organisms, where we have many things that could have gone bananas, but where we agree as a civilized society, it's banned to go down that route. And I hope that we will continue to do this. Yeah. And there's no doubt that there will be countries in the world who will not do this, which is one of the reasons why I think it's a weapons race that we have to stay ahead, because the good news is, as long as you have the strongest large language models, like it will like it's not enough for the other guys to build some malignant ones. It will primarily probably be the best ones that are dangerous. So that it is necessary to continue to invest in them and to support making sure that we stay ahead. And we are, in the Western world, clearly ahead.
Yeah.
But there is another risk, which I think is more subtle and more sneaky, which is because if you think that you're done when you produce text that sounds coherent, and even if it doesn't hallucinate, which it hasn't been hallucinating for a long time, like a year and a half ago, since I saw the last serious hallucination from a large language model. So that's not the key. That's not the problem. The problem is more that if we apply the lens that we used to, or the optics that we used to say, okay, this looks pretty coherent, that must have been worked through, therefore it's good.
Yeah.
If we do that now, that can be like 30 seconds or 10 seconds of brain work of somebody where you really needed more. And if you stop thinking after that, and if you make it turn it into a habit of not working with things, because what is the risk? Like, you stop thinking as humans. We stop creative problem solving. We stop being critical. And if back to the 70s and the 80s, like if you actually had a book published by a publisher, you could be reasonably sure that it's been read by several eyes of qualified editors who are well-trained, in like intellectually capable people.
Right.
If you get a book today that is bound, it can be the worst kind of crap, right? So you cannot judge it by its cover, which you actually could in the past. Yeah. So if we apply the same metrics for what probably signals quality, it's not the same anymore. And back to this creative problem solving, and to your examples from defense, like during Afghanistan and Iraq, we had lots of drones, we had lots of stuff that was automated and technology. But what was the number one thing that really set the optics on this apart? In my opinion, it was that you taught all soldiers creative problem solve.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that the impact was obvious. Like the top commander basically highlighted it, and in one of my co-authors' previous books, in an interview, he highlights that he believes that was the biggest outstanding new factor in Afghanistan and Iraq. And why is that such a difference? The difference is probably it's the low-level jobs again that goes away. The stuff where you just use people for things that machines can do. Those jobs will of course be eliminated. Yep. But we can now move people into things that you absolutely need humans for. But what does that require? It requires the kind of high performance training that you work with and we work with.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So because the level of training, if you're at a level where all you're doing is you're fighting for your food and water for survival, you have no time to think about anything else. But once you get that taken care of, right, now you go into the next level, and then the next level, the next level. So I agree with you. As long as we start taking care of the things we don't need to have us taken care of anymore, allows us to look forward and advance as a species. So I think that you're spot on that. So okay, take a quick pause here. I'm looking at the next area I want to talk to you about, and this is about leadership. And actually the next two are kind of interrelated. I got leadership and then a learning culture. So we're going to probably bounce back and forth between these a little bit. So your first company, Sophos Medical, right? Now you were still in med school when you had that, when you established that. So from a multiple CEO individual that you are, kind of want to dive into your approach on leadership. First off, what kind of gave you the confidence to start Sophos Medical, and what can where did that come from, and why did you take that leap in establishing the company, or was it just hey, want to do something and just young enough to do it, right?
Yeah, well, so there was never a big master plan behind it.
Yeah.
It happened because I was working on a research project, and part of that we needed to build simulators to study human errors. And then we realized they were great training environments. And then this project got a lot of European Union research and funding to build products. Okay. And then they didn't need us anymore. So two of my best friends that I recruited for us, they didn't want to hire us. They a little bit maybe, but they really like, let the grown-ups take over. And I was like, okay, if you really don't want them, like we'd been friends since high school, so let's go try to build something else. So that was when we started building computer simulators. Okay. And then one step took the next, and it's actually pretty late in this process that co-founder of that company, who was actually a real dog at that time, and I was still in medical school at that time, and he said, you can forget it. You have 50 people doing everything you tell them to do now. You're not going to go back and work as a resident. Like, you'll go nuts when the nurses are telling you stuff you know is wrong, but you have to do it. So I'm sorry to break it to you, but you probably should continue with what you're doing now. So I finished medical school primarily because my wife told me that I had to, and she became my adaptive learning thing, because I had 50 people working for me and a full-time job, and I had to try to finish medical school. But she was the one, when we were preparing for exams and stuff, she was able to actually pick up on my voice when we were going through stuff. She was like, I don't think you really knows this. Can you go through that again? Actually a human adaptive engine. And she was also the one who basically was able to filter the stuff. This is important, this is not important, so I could concentrate on only doing what was needed.
Wow. So
and then I did night shifts, because I had to do clinical time, right? So I had my day job, and then I did night shifts.
So how did that? Kind of landed on leadership for a second. One, you had a good advisor, obviously your wife. But two, kind of if you had, what's your kind of philosophy on leadership? I mean, as far as you had 50 employees, how did you run business? What was just the Ulrik's typical philosophy on how he treated his fellow humans while he on your company?
Well, so one thing was important in the story I told was the word friends.
Yeah.
Like it was basically like we were friends before. We exchanged drinking beer with coding and drinking beer and building products, and what is interesting is that we're all still together. Like, so I've done business with my friends, my family, my brother and sister-in-law are company lawyers, and I think that leaves it less of a leadership challenge, because if you're more like one team, and I may be the CEO, but if you think I'm deciding,
right? Good luck. So there's obviously a bunch of mutual respect, obviously,
and it's also and one of the things I'm often being asked about is this stuff or this question, like, how do you do business with your friends? Like, isn't that dangerous? Should you really, like, that's not a good idea, is it? It's a brilliant idea, because I don't have a job. I honestly, I go play with my friends every day, and I've done it for my entire adult life. But I think the main risk, of course, and what I think people are afraid of, is when money gets involved. Like, who will actually try to make a larger land grab? And I could probably, when we built Area9, have gotten substantially more equity than the other three founders, but we're musketeers. We have exactly the same amount of shares.
Okay.
And I think that being able and willing to do that and have that fundamental like really, really flat hierarchy, and then there will be people who watches this being like, hey, he's pretty determined when he wants something. But that's also like it's of course a balance between the two worlds, and it cannot become a something where it has to be a democratic voting every time you have to make a decision about a product. But I think that fundamental respect and working with people you like profoundly appreciate working with leaves it to less of traditional management. You're less reliant on classic management tricks.
So you're taking away from, when you started at Sophos Medical, what are some of the lessons, kind of highlight your main lessons learned you took from that and transfer it to Area9 and how you're guiding that company? So I'm assuming not everybody there was a close friend going into Area9. You have actual people you hired that you didn't know before. Right?
There are a few.
Yeah. All right. So how did you? What are some of the big lessons you took from Sophos Medical over to Area9?
Well, so I think there was a really important lesson when we sold Sophos. I became part of the leadership team of a large multinational company, and when I grew up, I didn't think, and I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit it, but I didn't think that humility was a really important strength. I actually thought that the world was humble enough, and it was about knowing which direction you wanted to go. And I think that one of the things that I wish I'd done differently was to be humble at that point. And I think I've gotten more humble over time. I probably also gotten more stubborn in other areas, but I think there's a difference between the two. Stubborn about things of a certain kind, but humble about many other things, including this deep respect for the fact that you really need people to want to do want to be in this joint mission we're on. And you're right that many of the people we have hired, but one thing that is important is the people you pick up on the way, or the people who join the team on the way, don't ever burn bridges with them. Like when and it was actually a leadership story from one of the most despicable Danish politicians ever. And probably one of the most hated Danish public politicians, like a crazy populist back in the 70s that gave us a head start on bad politics in Denmark ahead of everybody else in Europe. But that guy had and he ended up in prison as well for tax evasion and stuff.
Right.
But later in life, like many years later, I had a chance to work with a guy who worked for him. He was a lawyer, and that guy had left his company because they were worried about these tax schemes and Ponzi schemes and stuff. But he had walked into this, but he was a legend. He was a legal legend, this guy, Mogens Glistrup. And he had walked into his office with two of his colleagues and intending to quit, or determined to quit. And they were afraid of him because everybody was afraid of this guy. And what happened was that after he had told them that he and the two others would quit, the chair slammed into the wall behind Mogens. And he got up and he reached across the table and shook his hand and said, "I love it when young people show initiative." That story, like, it's probably the only positive thing that has ever come out of that man. But that story, like, really changed my and enforced this idea about when people leave, like, don't ever burn bridges. And that's also why most of the people who have done other things on the way, almost all of the good people are 100% of the top team has been here all the way through. And if you take somebody like our common friend at Relion, Marco Vannin, if he's not with us, he works with one of our partners.
You bet.
So it's like this approach to actually being able to stay friends and colleagues.
Awesome. So I always ask this one question. So as you know, any of the companies you want to talk about, but if you want to highlight Area9, doesn't matter. You've seen the movie Forrest Gump. I don't know if you've seen it. Okay, so my life is one big Forrest Gump event. Anyway, I'd like to know if there's any situations where I think you've already touched on a couple of them, but if you want to kind of dive into one or two where you basically just backed into something and got lucky, or not lucky, but took advantage of being handed an opportunity. So what kind of events out there were like that for you, maybe in any one of your companies, a Forrest Gump moment?
Well, so I think that one of the things that you building companies typically for your own money and trying to bootstrap things, you get used to is you simply cannot see surprises as a defeat. Like you have to see them as an opportunity.
Oh yeah.
And almost to the level where whether they are an opportunity or not, they have to be turned into one.
Yeah.
So we had a recent one, but one of the most fortunate things I've done over the last couple of years, even, when the bank crisis was hitting the world, and not only my personal bank, First Republic, went belly up and was sold, but our company bank, one of the companies where we had a loan in, Silicon Valley Bank, also became completely weird. And began actually to get in the way of our business, and we were afraid that what would happen in that period of time. So we got the team together, and I was actually afraid, or concerned about what the future could bring. Could we raise enough capital to cover this gap? And first of all, the team was absolutely on board with making a major strategic restructuring, almost to the level where we were thinking, why didn't we do it before? And the second thing was that the four of us who founded the company, and we were fortunate enough that we could write a check and just buy them out, and basically say, let's use this as an opportunity to say, now let's go back and do it exactly like we would like to run this company. Like, let's get back to what we know we're good at, not what people expect us to do. And it was basically turned from being, could we actually be a serious cash problem if they insist on getting their loans repaid straight away, and today we have no debt and basically cash positive. We figured out how to focus it, and it's done very late. Like we have I don't know, I've been running companies for 20 years, and being able to out of the blue see something like this. So I think turning crisis into something positive.
Yep.
There's an opportunity in many things.
So kind of moving on a little bit here to learning culture and its impact. My favorite quote from you when we first met at our company party. I'm going to read it for the audience here. Here, quote, "What if you educate your employees and they leave? What if you don't and they stay?" So, how can an organization, build that learning culture that balances both, retention and growth? What are some of your ideas on that? Given your experience.
Yeah, so I think that there is an interesting paradox here that lots of companies think they can recruit talent and they can recruit competencies.
Yeah.
And in the past, that has been possible. I think that that what the future will bring is that we, to a much wider extent, will have to train people for the specific jobs that they're doing. So you're looking for an ability to learn.
Got it.
And one of the things that I'm looking for is, and that we're looking for, and half of our company is R&D. So we've hired a lot of programmers over the years.
Oh wow!
Like there are 0 of our programmers who can program in the programming tools we're using when they come. Like because we build our own super specialized tools. So all programmers who are hired will have to learn a new approach to programming.
Got it.
We're also extremely aggressive in terms of the development methods. So basically, programmers have for the last 20 years had to be recruited based on their ability to change. That led to a completely different approach to recruitment practices and how do we test them by doing.
I was going to say, how do you measure that? You measure creativity. How do you measure that?
It's a long test, and one of the things was for many years we have moved to another kind, a new version of that test. But one of the first tests we used for I think more than 10 years. One of the things was that the programming that they had to do, it was days of programming they had to throw in to be even considered. One of the things they had to do was to break the rules. Like you simply couldn't solve it if you followed the rules we'd set.
That's awesome.
And because the problem here is like if you like there is no way we can define all the rules right. And the thing was they didn't have enough information, so if they tried to solve without asking for help, like and one of the best programmers we've ever had was dangerous in another way, and he had to leave. But technically he was a good programmer, but he couldn't write code that was safe for people to be around. And he actually had to leave. So I think you have it's a mix between recruiting for people who can change, but also recruit for people who understand that there can be things you need to learn in order to be safe as part of this team. But the next part is even thinking that learning is necessary can be a tough thing.
Yeah.
Like I demand that everybody on my team, they learn something new at 1 hour every week. That sounds like a pretty humble request, right? But I've had people quit, people who are in the field for us, who were out trying to convince clients that learning was important, who said that was a ridiculous thing to force them to do, because I also asked them to take a note of it every week, what they learn. Not so much because I read it, but because it's a way to make sure that it stays on your radar. And then they would be, I don't have time for that. I need to do my real job. And they simply didn't understand that their real job is to learn. Like first and foremost, they need to embrace this approach to education to be able to help others. Like, and that is kind of shocking when we talk about people you hire and you meet for the first time. You're like, you really think you can go out and teach others how to learn, but you're not willing to learn yourself?
Well, I think you hit to the heart of the matter. As a leader, you establish critical criteria for your team, right? And it doesn't matter what that critical criteria is. It's upon you, the leader, establishing that, and holding people accountable to that standard naturally separates people that shouldn't be with you anyway. So now you keep those like minds with you, and that's how you move forward, right?
And it kind of leads to another adjacent problem here, or interesting thing we find. When you roll out these adaptive systems, you find a very wide range of responses. Yes. And we have a large client that came back and said, we need to understand why we're seeing such a wide range of feedback. The vast majority is super happy, but we have a hardcore of people who are really mad at this, and including high-ranked officers who are saying, never put this crap in front of our eyes again, kind of feedback. And what is interesting was that it can have two things can happen. I always look at these myself, because it can actually be that you've over-engineered it. Because if you have a technology that really works, and then you force people to do way more than you think you are, and that's a classic problem in education, that we are naive about what people can learn. So if we know exactly how long it takes to learn 1,000 things. Like it takes 1,000 minutes in an adaptive system. It takes 2,000 minutes on average if you're somewhere else. And that's 2,000 minutes where you hope some of it sticks. It's 1,000 minutes validated. So we have these metrics, and we know like exactly, like of course it varies a little bit, but not that much. That means that it could be that it's over-engineered. And that's why people are mad, because it's unrealistic to spend 10 hours on something where they have a few hours. But in most cases, it's something else. It's people who actually are used to, in e-learning systems, skip through the slides and at the end of it memorize the answers to 3 things. Because the crap doesn't work anyway.
Right.
Like it's
well known. You're checking a block. That's what you're doing.
Exactly. And it's well known that pilots in the US, they pay for a program that basically clicks next for a weekend on one of the compulsory training programs. Well known.
Yeah.
So the problem here is, if you're in that category and suddenly you're being held accountable for really learning, and you really don't want to learn. But what was even wilder was, in this case, we went through the specific feedback, and I found one that made my head explode. Where the guy, because one of the things we do is a large body of my research has been around unconscious incompetence, which is probably the biggest culprit when people don't learn. Like they don't know that they even need to learn.
Right.
So we always ask people about how confident you are about the answer for every single interaction, because that actually builds the metacognitive skill of being able to identify where you should focus your efforts. This person said, this program is really, really annoying and bad for me, because when I answer something and I say that I know the answer but I'm wrong, it tells me I'm wrong. It is removing my self-confidence. I'm leaving this program way less confident than I was before. And I was like,
wow.
So you are not only unconsciously incompetent, you're deliberately incompetent.
Yeah.
You're insisting on being left in your incompetence, and anybody who challenges this is bad? Yeah. That's coming back to your question. Like, for most people, that would probably be a good example for somebody where we need at least a coaching conversation.
Yeah, either that or go find somewhere else to play, not around this playground, right?
It's at least if you have somebody like that, if it's life or death, because often in companies you can hide.
Right.
You would never accept it in a situation where the rest of the team dies if you have somebody like that on the team, right?
Yeah. You don't want that being a jump master checking your parachute, or your dive rig if you're a dive master, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So all right, so Area 9, and you've reached a lot of people, millions, I'm assuming right now, where you've reached as far as your system. If you can give me like one success story that really stands out to you, as a testament to the power of adaptive learning, and also maybe one of the biggest challenges you had out there, and how you overcame, and what lesson learned you got out of that.
So our largest partner and client is American Heart Association. We train millions for them every year, and with them every year. And the interesting thing was, they actually were also a client of our first company. So the fact that they came back, and particularly during COVID, where we had to fundamentally change the standards for how you do emergency procedures, because suddenly you had the main problem in COVID being moved in and out of the lungs. So what do you do with the emergency personnel that are performing life-saving measures, CPR, ventilation, stuff like that? So they had to retrain a lot of people really fast. So we built that with them, rolled it out in no time, and then they came back and said, we'd like to work with you again. Like, can we do all of it like we used to? And can we work together? We believe in your new approach. So this thing where when not only you solve the problem, but you also are able to establish that trust, that you can have these deep partnerships where you deliver the impact, you can measure it, but it's also something where over time you can work together as true partners. So for me, as from a management perspective, those are the kinds of stories, and those are the kinds of partnerships, and very similar to actually what we do with the I think owners of CAVU rely on, or co-owners of CAVU, like completely the same thing. Deep partnership. completely committed on both sides. So those are the great stories. The not so great stories are the cases where you're surprised is when people are genuinely not interested in learning. We had a case, and sometimes particularly people who think that that you can just go sell what we're doing. We've had people on the team who have tried that, and I honestly thought that was possible as well, because everybody told me, now let's go hire a sales force. But in those cases, some of them have gone out and said, we can cut training time to half, no qualification. So they tried to do that with an American manufacturing company in the food space, and the client came back and they were furious, being like, there's something wrong with this. Usually it was a 25-minute e-learning module where we took, and now it takes 25 to 35 minutes to get through it. We've not saved any time. What you've done doesn't work. And I was like, okay, maybe we've made something bad. Like, so we looked at it, and the thing was that they were going through 35 things. Like, there were 35 learning objectives in it. We know that it takes an average of 1 minute per learning objective, which means 25 minutes is actually pretty damn good. If they think that they can teach 35 things in 25 minutes of normal e-learning, they're delusional. In which case, we went back to them and said, we're sorry, but we can't solve this problem, because if you need them to know these 35 things about hygiene, like, it will take 25 to 35 minutes. It's actually really good that it doesn't take more. So we simply cannot solve the problem for you. And in that case, luckily in most cases, people are like, okay, we get it. We understand now that we moved from a model where that didn't work, and we didn't validate whether it worked, to something where we actually know that they've done it. But of course, your heart sinks a little bit when they say, we go back to the old stuff because we're just going to turn the blind eye.
Oh, yeah. So actually, just popped in my head here. Have you read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell?
Yes.
So does it take 10,000 hours? Or can adaptive learning speed that up? Or like you just said, something maybe you do, if it's critical, you still got to take that time.
Oh, you're hitting on a sore point here.
Yeah.
Because the guy who did the research behind that, Anders Ericsson, was the guy who founded our advisory board, and a dear friend of mine.
Yeah.
He sadly passed away during COVID.
Oh, wow.
But Anders, every time it was quoted the way you just quoted it, he would explode. And he would say, no,
that's great.
They're butchering my research.
Yeah.
Because it was not 10,000 hours of practice.
Okay.
It was 10,000 hours of deliberate practice.
Oh.
And the big difference
is huge. That's a
really big difference.
Yeah.
So Anders Ericsson was also the one who coined the term deliberate practice. This thing that characterizes top performers' way of learning is deliberate practice. And of course, it's not 10,000 hours for everything.
Right.
But the point here is it takes a long time.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time of dedicated, focused practice where you're constantly closing the next big gap. And that's the big difference. Like, you can do the same thing over and over again and learn nothing for 10,000 hours. Yep. And in many cases, you might be able to get to real mastery in way less than that, depending on what it is. But there is no doubt that if you are able to use technologies that have some of this focus built into the technology itself, because part of the adaptivity that we have invented means that we actually help people who cannot do it themselves focus on their weak areas. Yeah. And as part of that process, you also become better at finding your weak spots.
Yeah.
And one of the things that a young researcher has just shown is that there is transfer between domains. So if you get better at knowing what you don't know in one area, in one subject, you actually immediately transfer it to another area as well. Okay. So it's a skill you can learn, this thing about focusing on your weak areas.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges, at least for myself, is knowing where those weak spots are. Because if you know that, then you can focus on it, right? And if you focus on it, then you hopefully fix it, at least maximize your personal level. Not everybody can be a Joe Satriani guitar level player, but you can definitely mitigate your weaknesses to where you can be a pretty darn good guitar player at the end of the day if you follow and really deliberately practice your weak points, right? Yeah. So in big picture terms, the adaptive learning helps everybody resolve their weak issues if you put the deliberate practice to it. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, and it helps. So when you see this macro effect of cutting down training time, and it's really important that it's for the same number of learning objectives that you can cut it down to half.
Gotcha.
Because in normal learning environments, it takes 2 minutes.
Gotcha.
So what you normally can cover in 45 minutes, you can cover in 23 with adaptive systems.
Gotcha.
But it has to be apples and apples. Like, that you are covering the same learning objectives and you really want to do that.
Understood.
But where do you find those minutes? You find them primarily in not repracticing things you already know. So the thing is, if you have to go through everything multiple times, out of which maybe 50% of it you already picked up the first time, let's not go back to that. And in some ways, the traditional U.S.-centric or the very frequent practice in U.S. colleges with flashcards, and you make these stacks where you, like it's called a Leitner box, where you take the ones that you don't know and you put them in one stack, and you take the ones you know and put them in another stack. Like this kind of approach, it's better than not doing it for sure. Mm-hmm. The difference, of course, is that if you're then able to increase the quality of every interaction, so that it's not like just when you recognize the answer, now you need to be honest with yourself on whether you actually knew it or not, but that you're provoked to bring it actively, like we are with many of the pros we're using. If you sum all of that up, that's when you see it. But a large part of it is to focus on your weak areas, that we help people focus on their weak areas for them. In some ways, it's like a GPS that helps you find the optimal path.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So kind of getting into the last quarter of what we got going on for questions. I'm looking at the future and your kind of your personal insights on a lot of this stuff. So looking ahead to next 5, 10, 20 years, what do you think is going to be the most significant shift in how we approach, education, both, not only in schools, but in workplaces? Would you foresee next generation for, from adaptive learning being a big part of that? If so, where do you think it'd be some of the best opportunities for adaptive learning?
So I think they all center around some of the same concepts. It's around how do we make learning really work for what we need it to do. Mm-hmm. So why are we even learning? Like we're learning like to be able to do something useful for yourself, for your employer, for your family, for your community. But all of those imply that you have to be able to do something with what you've learned, right?
Right.
And what you're able to do. And that ability is different from the way we've traditionally organized our education systems, whether it's in traditional K-12 or it's in higher ed or it's in the workplace. Because typically the goal has been to pass an exam or get a score or pass the next standardized test.
Right.
But those goals are offset from what I just described, right? Which is like, what does it need to end up with? And I think that we need to turn it on its head and be like, let's start with the end in mind. Like most other efficient systems work that way. We start there and then we work backwards from there. And I think that in order to do that, we need to do a couple of different things. Very concretely, we need to get beyond rote memorization of so much and be able to teach people in a way where it makes more sense. So it's getting to higher order thinking, more integrated thinking. But where I grew up in Denmark in the 70s, where we already knew it back then that would be important. Our parents' generations knew that. So they thought, let's just skip all the multiplication tables and send the kids out in the rain with an acoustic guitar and rubber boots and under an apple tree and hope that it works. And then one day they would think about maybe math is important. It didn't happen. We lost like half a generation of physicians who cannot do like single-digit multiplication,
right?
And therefore the drip rates are off in the ICU. Like it's a problem.
Wow.
If you think that you can just skip that. So unfortunately, we need to do both. But what was right about it was if you can find a way where you make the motivation to learn driven from the goal, and that's what these systems we are also describing in Mastery are. That's about examples of education systems, whether it's kids, whether it's young adults, whether it's adults, that you start with something meaningful, something purposeful, learning with a purpose, and then you work back from there. You still need to learn all the other things,
right?
And you probably need to learn more than in the past. But as an example, like my wife and youngest daughter has not been caring about photography. My oldest daughter has a minor in photography. I love photography, above water, underwater. And just yesterday, I went out for a walk with the youngest and our dog, and I saw this flower bed of blue flowers, and she found me lying in the flowers, taking what I think is an amazing shot of the dog. And I show her the photo, and she looks in the viewfinder on the camera, and she's like, "How do you take a photo like this? Can you teach me?" Like, she's always been ignored. There's cameras all over our house. She has not seen them in the past. She saw the pic when she saw what she can do with it. She started asking about how do you turn these things. And took her. I immediately gave her the camera, saying, "Let's work on this. Do you want to learn? Sure, I'll teach you.
Yeah.
Let's take a photo." But if we start with the ISO and shutter speeds and vantage points in a theory, I think a lot of people would rather watch paint dry.
Absolutely.
And that's unfortunately the traditional education. If we look at adults, what do we do there? We separate the meaningful things we do at work from education. We say, now let's go on a course. Now let's stop everything we're doing, take 3 days off, and then we come back and we continue down the same route. Whereas, what if we actually turned what we're doing into learning?
You know, that's it. Actually, before I make my statement, what's your favorite camera you got in your house?
Well, so it depends. My heart lies with Leica, but I primarily shoot Canon.
Oh, okay. Why is that?
Well, because it's a longer story. I carry a Leica camera with me everywhere.
I have a pair of Leica binoculars, so yeah, I understand.
And the crispness of the pictures, and when you get it right, it's just amazing. But I shoot Canon for both wildlife and underwater.
Okay, both digital?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. All right. Yeah, I was kind of curious about that.
And the new R1 is amazing.
Yeah.
Don't I'm not that on film.
Well, it's an opinion. That's all it is.
The new R1 is absolutely rock and roll.
Right on.
I shot 265,000 pictures in Africa. About half of them with the R1.
Oh my God. That was over 2 weeks, right? When you were out there? My God. Wow. How do you dive through all that? I mean,
Lightroom is amazing. Lightroom works as a photographer thinks. So
oh wow. Okay.
I love it.
Wow. Hey, we'll take that one offline. I was just thinking about, whether, you got Will over here as a, former fighter pilot, and you got myself, the Navy SEAL. And for me, until you mentioned you got to view the end state before you start teaching. I think both of those of our backgrounds really highlight that concept to a T, because we both were very motivated by watching that, like for me, watching somebody jump out of an airplane or come out of the water with a Draeger on and an M4 carbine getting ready to do an assault. Will, I'm putting words in your mouth. I'm thinking you probably saw a Blue Angel show at some point and going, heck yeah, that's what I want to do, right? And so once you get that inspiration, now you're ready to go through the rigor of learning because it's going to be tough. And so you've already predisposed your mindset to go through that. And you also have the inspiration to take that learning on. And so if you combine that inspiration and motivation with an adaptive learning that you don't have to keep relearning things all the way through it, you make it more efficient. Now you just made the best possible of all worlds. Am I getting it kind of right as far as like a theory and a concept?
Yeah. But it's also very important to highlight this thing that the adaptive learning itself is just a tool.
Yeah.
It's just a way to allow for even more focus on the really hard things. Yeah. So as an example, like back to the diving examples, a lot of dive courses are so stressed that you let the students kneel on the sand bottom. When they take their mask off, it's like 1 second, maybe a little bit of water in it. Like a lot of instructors will deny that that's what's happening, but you have no idea how many people you see where they get water in the mask, and why are you not just emptying it? Oh, when I think I did it during my class, and it's like it has to be second nature, man. Yeah. You have to be able to do this. And I have a beautiful example with my little nephew. He wanted to dive so bad, and when he turned 10, straight away wanted to learn to dive. So I was teaching him, and everything was great. He was so good. He was teaching his parents how to take his rig out of his mouth and put it back in, but he refused to take his mask off. Very normal thing with both kids and adults. Yep. This mask off thing, as you know, can be a tough thing. And I said, then one day we were preparing for the afternoon dive, and he said, you're not going to force me to do things I don't want to do. I said, of course not. Are you crazy? You know me. Then he looked at me, ready for a fight. And I said, it's totally fine. Like I can give you a provisionary. Like you can be a scuba diver, not open waters, and then you just have to. You can dive with me still, and we can go do these dives. You just won't be an independent diver then. He looked at me again, and I said, do you know why? You remember yesterday when your mom kicked my rig out of my mouth? The reason why we practice the rig in and out is that can happen.
Right.
If she had just hit a little bit further up, and he had kicked my mask off, and you had grabbed it and given it to me, I need to be able to clear it to put it back on, because it's not enough to just put it on, right?
Right.
He looked at me, he came to dinner, and my sister-in-law said, do you know who's been in the pool all afternoon trying to teach me to take my mask off? He did. And he became an awesome diver, and he still laughs at the story, but he was ready to fight me on that mask. He thought I was the problem,
right,
until he realized the purpose. And I think that this thing around being able to embody the need for and embrace the need for what we're learning is something we underestimate.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Alrighty. So, I'm sitting here thinking about, what CAVU does, and one of our, and how it can maybe relate to adaptive learning. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. So, how much do you know about, what CAVU? We go out into an organization, we embed ourselves, we talk about the concepts of continuous improvement and crew resource management with any given organization. Do you have any thoughts on how adaptive learning may help our coaching on site with people? If you could, think about, you give me some ideas on how that might work for us going down the road.
It's the same as we, for instance, do with the cave diver.
Okay.
Like understanding the principles of team training, understanding the principles of human factors, understanding these principles when you then try to practice it. It's, of course, it will never replace what you're doing.
Sure.
But it can accentuate it. It can help.
Yeah.
And it can help put things into a framework. So in some ways, you could say that it's this concept that in defense terms that has been really hot the last year about cognitive superiority, where can you establish that when people think about things that they actually have the capacity to start practicing them? So I think that it's that interaction between understanding why we're doing things, how it's being done, the framework for it. You can teach near misses, full misses, understanding of human errors, closed loop communication. You still need to practice it, but understanding what it is and why it is and examples of it, it's a way to prepare for it. So you can, anytime you are in a situation where you for more than 2 minutes are explaining something, you should think about maybe I shouldn't be the oracle of this information. Maybe we could have done this in a different setting. So 100% of my time is used on the complex, higher order thinking stuff.
Yeah, okay, got it. So, all that being said, we talked about a lot on this episode, and I really appreciate your insights. Last thing I always ask anybody as we close out a show, so you've been a CEO, you've been a diver, an entrepreneur, innovator. I always ask everybody for their, what would you tell either, all the young professionals out there getting ready to start their life, or your 20-year-old self? What are your top 3 scars, your top 3 lessons learned in life, and what did you take from those?
So I think the first one I've already mentioned, which is when I was 20, I wish that somebody had told me like humility would be an asset.
Yeah. Okay.
And a lot of people laugh when they hear that, I think.
It's true, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think the second thing is also which is actually a relative of humility, I think, to be able to kill your darlings. Like, you can easily fall in love with your own ideas.
Kill your darlings. That's a great.
And there is a level of being stubborn and persistent that is important, but it's also, in some cases, you just have to ditch the bitch and move on. And it's a really complicated thing. And I think maybe the third one, not maybe, but for sure the third one is be okay to commit and commit to other people around you. And for me, like, and it's not as much of a scar as it's something where people think it would have gone wrong, which is this thing about being able to work with your closest friends and be trust each other. And it relates to the underlying thing, which is that you can trust yourself in not doing something you will not be proud of, making that land grab.
Yeah.
I usually say, if you empty a bag of M&Ms between you and your friends, can you not take more than you deserve? Like, and I realized
the M&M test. I want to use that.
Exactly. I realized that it was something I was raised with. I clearly remember how particularly my mom said very early that we grew up relatively poor. They were teachers and they had lots of student loans, and we only got fresh shrimp really rarely. And when somebody at a family dinner would grab half of the bowl of shrimp, and my mom would be like, It's actually something you look around the room, you know that there is one bowl of shrimp, you only take what you deserve.
Yeah.
And if you trust yourself you can only take the M&Ms or the shrimp that you deserve. I think that and if you do that over time, you don't need the complicated bonus plans as the people around us will know. Like we have had bonus programs that were never written down because nobody knew what they were. But when we made money or something good happened, we share. If it's a dry season as it's been after COVID, where like we're in good shape compared to many people in education, but it's still not any kind of champagne mood.
Right.
Like we just all pull and then we share fairly when we get there.
Wow. Great advice. So before we close out the show, what was the name of the book again, and when's it coming out, and where can we get it when it does?
So the book is called Mastery. I wrote it with Tony Wagner, who's a lifelong researcher and best-selling author on this. It's coming out on Basic, one of the big trade publishers, owned by the French conglomerate Hachette.
Okay.
And it's available September 16th. It's already on Amazon.
Oh, okay. Great.
Announced on Amazon.
All right. Awesome. Well, hey, Ulrik, thank you so much. Pleasure talking to you. Just wanted to say thanks for everybody for showing up, and like and subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you on the next episode of Scar Tissue. Thank you.